Welcome to episode number 7 of the Camera Shake podcast with me, Nick Kirby, and Kersten Lutz, the photo and video podcast coming straight out of isolation into your eardrums. We'll be talking about life in lockdown, what's happening in the world outside, and if we're lucky, we might even touch on photography too. But before we get started, please throw us a solid by liking this episode and subscribing to the podcast. If our buttery smooth voices aren't quite enough for you, then pop over to YouTube and check us out there in full Technicolor. Let's crack on. In today's episode, we have an awesome guest who is not only an incredible photographer, working with the likes of Monster Energy, Automech and Puma, but he also provides media consultancy, web design, and he even has his own podcast. But above all, he's a really good friend of mine. I want you to welcome Dan Fegent. Hey Dan, how's it going, man? You all right?
Hey Nick, nice to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey Dan. You all right?
Hello Kersten, thank you very much for having me, guys. It's really cool to be on this podcast.
Excellent. It's been such a long time. It makes me happy to see your face again. Really cool, dude.
It has. It's been ages, like 5 or 6 years, I think, now at this point. It's incredible. Yeah, time flies.
And it looks like my hair's been growing for about 5 or 6 years too. So,
Same.
You know, lockdown hair. Love it. Speaking of lockdown though, how's this been affecting you and your business?
Right. Well, yeah, a bit about me, I guess. I am primarily a photographer, as you said, exactly, and I'm primarily an event photographer. So lockdown was not kind on my trade. Yeah, it was really scary. I'd be lying if I said it didn't. I start off every year with a series of contracts that outline my work, kind of gives me an idea of how much I'm going to earn, when I'm going to work. I pick up things throughout the year, but it gives me a solid structure. To see that taken away in the space of a few days was really terrifying. To go from knowing your income to not knowing your income, really, really scary. Yeah, so I've had to adapt. That's really, yeah, it's not been good for any of us. I don't think any photographers who work outdoors, who work with marketing teams, is damaging, really damaging.
Mm-hmm. So how have you gone about, what are the type of things that you've done to kind of help yourself through lockdown?
Well, okay, so first off, I caught up with all my editing. That was the big thing. So I did have an insane backlog of pictures that didn't quite make the initial cut. I work quite quickly at an event, especially if it is the events, I'm literally delivering images within 2 hours of the end of the event. So I have a very fast workflow. As far as I'm concerned, anyway. I know people who are quicker, but I consider that to be pretty quick for me. I've fine-tuned that. So anyway, my backlog was huge. So the first week was spent reorganizing my backlog, getting through it, editing everything, finding a few gems here and there, and putting them aside and stuff like that. Right, that was great. So we all love a week off, right? That's fine. Then I was like, right, what can I do now? So I started to overhaul my own website. Again, long overdue. I think it was up until 2 months ago, it was 3 or 4 years out of date. So it's one of those, you're always too busy, aren't you? So anyway, went from there. And then I thought, right, I need to find a way to bring in an income, because this is not going to get any better very fast. It's not going to get better quick. So I looked at skills that I've learned, picked up over the years, not necessarily primary skills with photography, but skills that I've learned through working with marketing teams and so on. So I started doing a lot more website design, a lot more social media support, and taking over social media accounts to help people and try and sort of improve marketing. A lot of my targeting has been sort of smaller businesses and the tourist industry, because again, these are all places that are struggling. And I'm not trying to take advantage of the situation, but I'm trying to show that I can lend a hand and I can offer my support and offer skills to improve their business when we all get through this. So that's really what it is. I've just adapted. Yeah.
And I think that's a key word right there, is the ability to adapt during this situation. You know, we're in the self-employed game, you know, right now, and still need to try and make a living, still need to earn some money. And you being able to take some other skills that you do have that you may not have used as your primary skills over the last few years, and to be able to utilize those now is so critical, and you're very lucky to have the additional skill sets there too.
I think so. Yeah, no, I think so, Nick. I'm always scared of putting all my eggs in one basket. Which I know is a cliched expression, but I'll devote all my time to learn a skill and try and become the best I can be at it. So that's how I've always treated the photography. And I have always felt like this is my style, this is what I deliver, and this is the best I can do it, right? This is as fast as I can do it. But I've always thought in the background, I need to keep learning things. So, I mean, even on my bookcase over there's a load of classroom books from Adobe. I've tried to learn every single piece of the suite, like just to know everything. I have read as many sort of CSS books as I can to try and learn some code. And I am just constantly trying to think of, what if this goes wrong? So even before all this, like, what if I don't want to do photography anymore? What if I wake up one day and go, nah, it's not for me? I don't know when that would happen, but what if that happens? I need to be able to have something else. So that's, yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I know you say it's a cliche phrase, all your eggs in one basket, but that is actually how we basically met, right? Years ago, totally outside of photography. It was, your mindset of knowing that I've got something to back up what I'm doing all the time, and have before you went fully self-employed, you had a full-time job as well, right? And that's where that's where we met. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about how we met and why you were working there at the time?
Yeah, of course. So I came out of uni, and I was, as most people do, you start hunting for a job, and you believe, because of the way it's structured, that after uni you got to get a good office job. Like if that's the way it is, if that's what you want to do. If you didn't do like a creative degree, and I was languages, so nothing to do with photography, then you got to find something. So anyway, I saw Amazon, and I thought, Amazon, that's pretty big. So I thought, I'll go for this, I'll try this. And I was very fortunate enough to get a job, and I started working in your team, Nick. So you were my manager for the 2 years I was there. And yeah, I loved it. I felt like it was rewarding in the sense that it was a good challenge. And a lot of it was like data analysis, but it was rewarding. I found a way to find it rewarding. I think that's the key way to do it. And I believed I wasn't too bad at it as well. So it was quite fulfilling, and it was rewarding in that sense. I know I've said that a few times, but it genuinely, I took something from it. I was earning on the side a little bit from photography, dipping my toes in. I was away maybe a few weekends a year. Most evenings were spent doing something photography related. In fact, I used to work, I don't know if you remember, but I used to work really early and leave really early, so that I could, because I would literally be home by 3 o'clock or 2:30, and then be like flat out with a client, like working on something. So to me, I was like, I can make this work. Absolutely exhausting, but I was young. So on that note, I've definitely learned not to work every minute of the day. That's changed. But back then it was necessity. So I think it was a support, a safety net, working there. And it meant that I could experiment and try and get photography jobs on the side whilst I worked there. That's really why I kept it. That's why I did it. And yeah.
So what, you've got that safety net there. You're like you say, you found the job rewarding, and and this is where we're actually really quite similar. No matter what it is we're actually doing, we'll find a way to make ourselves enjoy that, and to find where the rewards are in it. And that's difficult to do. So what was it that finally made you decide, well, I've been here for a couple of years, I need time to take the plunge. I'm going to go full-time self-employed doing my photography, the thing that I love to do. Yeah.
So it was a key thing. I mean, that was right, I want to get it straight that I definitely enjoyed what I did, and I could have stayed there and made a career out of it, because I was like, I can do this. I figured out the way it works. I know it sounds terrible, but you see the way it works, and you're like, right, I could live with this. I could be happy here, and I could make a career, or I could take a risk. And I was starting to gain more and more attention throughout the years I was there, and on the lead up to starting there, with marketing teams and clients that I was using, and my name was getting passed about, which is fantastic, and I was picking up more stuff, and And I thought, well, maybe there's a gamble here. And I started to sort of make an exit strategy in my head. I don't know about you guys, but I'm like tables and I write everything. I've got like, I worked it all out, like from how much it would cost to live and how much I could have to save up and everything. So anyway, that was my plan. Now, perfect plans don't always work. And it was definitely triggered early when Amazon decided to move location, which would have drastically changed the way my life was. It would have removed a lot of my flexibility because of the distance for commuting and stuff. And I said to myself, this is the moment. So I either decide this is my job or I take a risk. And I remember that. And it was about 8 months early, really, for my plan. Anyway, it was scary. I remember it's funny because I remember when I was trying to leave, in the sense of, like I said, I can't work here anymore. And I remember so many people were trying to convince me to stay, and it was lovely. But I remember the confusion on a few of the people's faces when I said, no, I'm going to go and be full time. Like, oh, you haven't got a job doing something else? And I said, no, I'm going to make my own job. I'm going to work full time for myself. And the confusion on some of the senior management at the time, they were like, that's insane. Like, what? And I was like, no, it's fine. If I don't try it now, I never will. Yeah, that was funny. So yeah, I was scared. It was the one thing that made it better is on the lead up to leaving. The months that sort of after my hands were forced, and I had I had 2 months, I think, to prepare. I think it was. I started messaging clients and letting them know I was going to be more available. People were very excited, which was really good for me. I was like, oh, this could work. And I was getting a lot of, Dan's going to be more available. You should use Dan. Like a lot of being introduced to other companies and so. And that was really cool. Like other departments getting in touch. Anyway. I remember I handed in, I left on the Friday of one of these weeks, and it was all coming to an end. It was scary. I left the office on the Friday, never to return. And then the Saturday morning, I was at Silverstone working. So it was good.
Just like that.
I know. And it wasn't as easy as that, please believe me. But it fell into place that it happened to be the first proper booking was like the day after. So I was like,
that's amazing. What a good feeling that must have been to know, right, I've just left my full-time work to go full-time self-employed. Oh, I'm at Silverstone. Oh, okay.
It's yeah, definitely.
Spectacular.
So yeah, and then since then, there has been scary times. It's been a big learning curve. There has been a learning curve, not just, I don't mean the skills, I mean everything else that surrounds it and running your own business and knowing how to price yourself, which I think is the hardest thing a photographer has, I believe. And yeah, so yeah, it's been a lot since then.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. Absolutely amazing. So now you, if memory serves, you worked a lot for Monster when you first left Amazon. Is that right?
That's right. So they have actually been a really loyal client of mine since I left Amazon and went full time. They've been very supportive. Yeah, thanks to Monster Energy, I've been to some amazing places. I have traveled the world and I have worked with some of my childhood heroes in motorsport and people that I can now call friends, which blows my mind. For me, it's working with the likes of Petter Solberg, who was a hero of mine as a kid, watching him on Eurosport, the rally, and now being able to work with him and his son is mind-blowing. I mean, other ones like Ken Block, to work with him and his team and be a regular on their projects where they come over to Europe and stuff has been like, that's childhood fantasy stuff, So yeah, it has been really, really exciting. So I'm very grateful to them. And through working with them over the years, yeah, it has, other people have obviously picked up on that, other companies, and have hired me accordingly. So they were an incredible launch pad for sure, Nick. Yeah,
that's amazing. I recall, so we were in touch, in quite close contact for a while after you left Amazon. I used to see you checking into airports all over Europe, almost weekly. I'm sure it was weekly.
It was that first Well, this is the thing, like, and when I say like it wasn't easy at first, like it was great having that first job right after I left, and then I think there was one more that year, two more that year, like big jobs, and then it went quiet, obviously for winter. And back then I wasn't established enough. I mean, now I don't even know what off season is some years, but back then I knew what off season was, and it was terrifying. And then I thought, this might not work. And it got round to like April the following year, and then it just went mental. And then it was just, as you say, every week it felt like, busy.
So during that off season, you know, how did that affect you? I know obviously it was scary as hell, but how did that affect you mentally? I know how I get when there's not work coming in or whatever it might be. You know, it does affect me mentally. And how did you get through that?
That was actually the triggering point for developing new skills. That was when I realized that, okay, I can sit and mope around and be sad and question my decision to go full time, or I can start learning skills and treating this as training time. And again, not just in photography, this is where I'm talking about all the other stuff. And I started to learn enough to be able to be efficient in video, and enough so that I could eventually, which has actually eventually led me to be a grip or to be a support cameraman, like action cam fitters or like basic stuff in the grand scheme of that. But again, gives me another avenue. So that was a big thing. I don't like wallowing around in self-pity. So it was a case of, right, this isn't working right now. Let's find a way to make this work so this doesn't happen again next year. And that's kind of where I went.
You know, that's a really inspirational lesson for people to hear and for people to learn. You know, if things aren't going well, or, you know, something's wrong, I will sit there and I know it will sit in the back of my mind. And it's very, very easy for that to suddenly become 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 20 weeks, whatever it might be.
Sleepless nights, Nick. I've had plenty, like lying up going, I mean, because there's also, when I started getting my own space and my own flat and everything up in Scotland, that was because I was self-employed. This is another thing, totally, to give even more stress when you make this decision. I had to pay 6 months to a year up front in rent. Yeah. So next thing you know, everything you've saved in the coffers, you're like, oh, I've got to give that away. And now I've got to find that again in 12 months time. Yeah. So I know it sounds silly, but that was like another stress on top of already a stressful situation. Like,
oh my word.
And it's good practice really for this whole lockdown situation, because I think, you know, no matter what industry you're in, if you're self-employed and you're faced with something unforeseeable, like lockdown, you don't know how long you're going to be out of work. You don't know where you're going to make money from, what your income is going to be, how insecure the future is going to be, and how long this is going to go on for. Then I think that's probably something you can then kind of come back to and think like, well, hang on a minute, I have dealt with this before. Actually, you know, once the first sort of the initial shock is over, you can kind of sit down and go, now I can deal with this. You know, that's got to be a massive advantage.
Yeah, it's 100% that. It was obviously there was an initial shock, and as I say, terrifying. Everything disappears, and when I got, not saying I got comfortable, but I'd got used to the consistent work. So I knew what was coming year to year, and I knew that. I suppose it is comfortable in a way, and then to have like that pulled out from under you, it's like, right, okay, now. Yeah, the first couple of weeks when I was cashing on my backlog and to redesigning my website, that was just to keep my mind busy, to stop myself from going like worried and crazy. And then after that, it's a case of right now, what can we do to survive? Like, really, is what it comes down to.
So just going back to the racing, because this has always intrigued me. Not the type of photography or videography I've ever got involved with at all. I can only begin to imagine how dangerous it could be. Perhaps it isn't. How do you keep yourself safe? I mean, you know, are you far away? Are you actually getting right into the mix?
I cannot tell you the amount of times I have been hit by stones, And I've got a story about that as well. I also hit by burning rubber. I have been burnt. I've had clothes ruined because of burning rubber. Fuel, I've been covered in race fuel. And if anyone knows race fuel, it's horrific. It removes all the moisture from the air, and you get this like wretched car. It's horrible. Yeah. I am definitely not always safe. It is. I have done some stupid things to get the photo, and it's all for that end result, isn't it? You just in the moment, especially in the last 4 years, I've had because of the nature of the events and who I've worked with, I've had health and safety advisors saying like, Dan, we know you've done something like this before, but we really don't think you should do this. And I'm like, it'll be fine, it'll be okay. They're like, well, we're just letting you know that we're not signing this off. So you're doing this on your own. I'm like, it's fine, I'll be good. So yeah, it's other people are starting to take notice that I've done some silly stuff.
But your shots are great. So
Thank you. Well, that's what everyone always says. They're like, it was worth it. Dan worth it. I mean, that most recent crazy one was probably sitting in a dodgem whilst Ken Block did donuts around me in Ford Escort Cosworth. That was probably one of the most ridiculous ones, because this dodgem wasn't just a dodgem on the floor, right? Because that would be safe. Because this was a dodgem on a wire wheel, like one of those ones for copper wire, like the big old. Yeah. So it was on a plinth, and the dodgem's just bolted on top with one bolt, and I couldn't rock it because if I rocked it, I'd fall over. And he came around me and did donuts, and I think he did like three or four donuts. Now I couldn't see at this point, which is usual, but I like to try and get some cool angles whilst I'm doing it. So I'm moving around in this dodgem, and then I realized I was pushing my luck because I could feel the whole thing wobbling. Now I couldn't see where he was, so that was that was probably one of the stupidest things I've done recently. But the results were sweet.
That sounds terrifying. You're much braver.
It's funny. It's not as bad as because I've done a lot of donut shots. They're kind of a classic with motorsport. You get the trick with my motorsport stuff is capturing something that not everyone can see. So that's always been it'll be the same, Kersten, I guess, with your concert photography and stuff. You're getting something that not everyone sees.
Yeah, it's almost like a heightened reality of what's happening, and you're capturing a feeling and an emotion as well as an action, and that's the tricky part, I think.
That is could not sum that. Is the emotion with the action. And I one of my favorite ones is to put yourself in a situation where no one should ever be, and for example, let's just say the 16 to 35 mm lens. So the Canon 16-35 is one of my favorites. You get that constant aperture of f2.8, and you can rely on it. So what I like to do is switch it to 16 mm and then have a car donut around me. And the shots are just, you don't have that perspective. Like, people do not see a car at 60mm right in their face with smoke pouring out the back and flames popping out the exhaust. So it doesn't, it's special.
Well, that's exactly that. When you do concerts and you're on stage with the act, nobody ever is there, and that's why you get these angles that you don't see. You don't see them. Well, you may see them on television, but you certainly don't see them when you're at the concert in the audience. That's what makes it so interesting, I think. Yeah. You're giving someone something special. You're not just taking a photo and moving on to the next one. It's about sharing something a bit special. And a lot of these people that we photograph, and I mean the concerts as well, they're people's heroes. So if you can show them their hero from another perspective, like that's a massive win, like for yourself, for that person, and the crowd, like the audience that you're making it for. Not to mention the company that hired you to do it. Like that's just awesome. There's kind of, you end up with a shot list, and I'm sure you're the same. I have like a very regular shot list that I'll regularly update as well, and that will have my key things, and I'll try and touch on as many sort of over the top moments like that, like what I was describing with the donuts, as possible in sort of one shoot or one event. So yeah, actually I've got another story of how dangerous it is. This one a little bit less exciting than achieving a fantastic result of a car sort of donutting around me or anything like that. This one was, I was in France, and I was on the Swiss border, one of the race tracks over there, and it's terrible, I've actually forgotten what it was called, but
you'll understand why I probably forgot it in a moment. So anyway, it was a drift event. It was one of the European Pro Drift Series events, and I'd been following the entire championship, and we're talking like prime busyness for me as well. So this was like in the start of June, and that I was going straight from there the next day to the Isle of Man TT, and then I was staying there for 2 weeks, and then I'd be going straight to another drift event. So it was non-stop. Like, I like using laundry services in hotels, which I never thought I would ever have to do, but that's literally how bad it was that summer. I remember quite explicitly. But anyway, in France, and I am capturing this, and I'm trackside at the time, and I was watching the movement of the cars, and I could see a really cool angle. So I'll try and explain it. They were coming down straight. So it was a Marshall point, and it was alongside a right-hand sweeping bend, and they were probably coming at this bend about 110, 120 mile-an-hour entry speed, okay, into what's called a clipping zone. And if you just imagine in drifting, a clipping zone is like a flag, and they have to get the rear end of the car or the front, depending on front or rear, as close to this sort of flag as possible, and that scores them the points, okay? Now, what was happening is the cars were coming off the edge of this and hitting what we call the kitty litter, which is the stones, okay? So they were hitting the stones, and the stones were spraying up towards in the direction of the crowd, but we're talking like a huge runoff, so it was never going to hit the crowd. But the shot looked amazing, because if you caught the car coming, you got the flag for the points, the kitty litter, you got the speed of the car, the stones start flying up, and in the background is all the crowd cheering, right? So wicked. Like, it was exactly what I wanted for the lead image that I was going to deliver and say, look at this. Like, we've got, because one of the key things was always promoting crowd interaction, always promoting the public without showing any faces. So that's the other thing. That's with a lot of commercial stuff. That's what you got to do. But anyway, I'm sat there, I'm watching the cars. I always like to assess the situation first. So I don't just dive in behind the lens, and because that's how accidents happen. Funnily enough, yeah. But that's how accidents normally happen. You just dive in and go, yeah, and then boom, that's it. This one, I watched these cars. So I watched 4 cars, and I thought, this car's contrasted enough for me to, I think, get a good shot. So I'll get one with this, and then I'll wait for one of the Monster Energy drivers to come, and I'll do the same thing. So I've got like options. Anyway, this car launches in. I remember it being a BMW, and he's coming in fast. He's coming in hot, and so I frame him, and it's what we call a reverse pan. So I start on what I call I don't know if it's technical term, but I call them reverse pans, because you start off following the car, but you don't start shooting until the car's exiting. So it's like you're not actually. It's weird. It's not like a normal pan like that. It's like nothing, and then click, 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 click. I'm following it around. So it's like weird psychological thing in my mind. I call it reverse pan. So anyway, car drops a wheel off, and I think I'm committed. So I'm gonna stay shooting this. I'm gonna track this car. He then drops a second wheel off into the kitty litter. Stones start flying, and my brain's telling me this is too soon. He's come off the track too soon. I thought, right, doesn't matter. I'm committed. I start clicking, start getting the photos, and then next thing you know, I get hit by something, and it hits. I feel a sequence of things spray across my face and the camera, and next thing you know, I'm on the floor. So I heard broken glass, and I was like trying to get my senses together. And Marshall, I do speak French, so I was lucky enough to kind of understand, but I could hear people talking about, I couldn't see anything at this point, and I was on the floor, and I could hear people talking about, he's been hit, the English guy's been hit, we need to get him off, like we need to clear him out. And I was like, I remember saying was, I'm not English, I speak French. So I was so confused. And they were just like, we need to help him up. So they picked me up, and I'm immediately sick everywhere. Like the worst, like awful. Like it's so terrible. And they're all looking at me, and like I've got, like when people are like, is he okay? And I was like, why are they looking at me? And I was like, I can barely see people. Why is there 7 of that person? Anyway, what happened is the stones had completely gone straight through my lens. So my 300 mil was ruined, which is fine. These things happen. The 1DX had about 3 or 4 new scars. That thing was still strong, by the way. So credit to that. So that had a few scars across the top. And then the rest of the stones had pelted me here, and the Marshall point that I was sat next to completely destroyed, like just through the walls, the windows, everything. So I'd been hit twice, I think 3 times across the head. And I remember being I don't remember really much. There's a hilarious sequence of photos though that show it, because I held my finger down on the button. But that was terrifying. From what I can gather, I said I was okay, grabbed my gear, walked back to the paddock, and this is where a friend of mine, Ricky, who I work with a lot, he was the videographer on these projects. Ricky saw me come back and he was like, "You okay, Dan?" And apparently I didn't say anything, and I just dropped my cameras in the paddock. So I dropped my cameras in the paddock and I went and sat in this shaded area, and I didn't talk to anyone. He came over immediately with a first aid and he was like, "You would never do that, something's wrong." And I had severe concussion basically from this impact and the welt. Oh my gosh, like absolutely amazing. So of course, what would you do in that situation? I couldn't carry on working, but I knew I had to be at the Isle of Man TT the next day. And I stupidly flew, and I have never been so sick in my life. So yeah, that was again a huge mistake, because people who are self-employed will understand, if anyone really, I mean, if you've got commitments, you've got to try and keep to them. And I didn't care about my own personal safety at this point, and I flew with a basically concussion. And I remember landing in France and landing on the Isle of Man, and the person I was meeting had already heard through the grapevine that I'd been hurt. And he said, "Can you see me okay?" And I was like, "Not really." And he said, "Right, you're not leaving the house for 48 hours. We need to keep an eye on you." And they kept me sort of locked away in a dark room for 48 hours. But that is the worst accident I've had, luckily, to be honest, because I know people that have had far worse. And I've seen far worse accidents in doing my job. But this was me anyway. That was my story.
Wow. Kids, don't try this at home.
So it was stupid. I mean, that's the risk with these things, like these reverse pans. They're not going to be where other photographers are, because they're not an easy shot, and also they're dangerous. And I would not advise anyone standing in the way of a car that's coming off into the kitty layer. It is stupid. And like I said, I've seen some terrible accidents with that. I've seen cars slam into tyre walls with people ducks behind the tyre walls that have just, the impact is just insane. I've seen concrete blocks squash photographer pits in the same situation as well, where people have had arms and limbs, legs trapped. I've seen bits fly off cars. One of the worst ones I saw was, we were in Poland for a street drifting event. Now, street drifting is what it sounds like. It was literally up the side of a mountain on public roads that are being shut off. Now they don't have runoffs; they just have curbs. It was a section where the cars were coming in at around 70, 80 mile an hour, and one car just clipped I think it was its front wheel, clipped it. The entire lower arm and hub assembly sheared off the vehicle and started catapulting up the hill. Now, I was with my colleague Ricky at the time, because it was one of those seasons for the championship drifting, European drifting, and we were sat really far back. So he was on like a 600mm video lens, and I was on a 400mm prime, and we were so far back, which is what I recommend for a lot of people, even though I've talked about the stupid stuff, be as far back as possible. Anyway, that's as I've got older. That's an age wisdom thing, I think. Self-preservation. But anyway, I'm looking through the lens and I saw it shear off. I got the photo of it shearing off actually somewhere on my collection somewhere. So it comes off and I see all these photographers running. And I see this young girl, and she is running away as fast as she can, but she's, instead of diving down the banks of the mountain, she's running up the side of the road, adjoined with the road, so she didn't want to fall down. Anyway, I was watching, and everyone's shouting, and this wheel just smacks her in her back, and she just went down like a sack of potatoes. And I remember turning and looking at Ricky and being like, "Oh my God, I think she's really hurt." Next thing you know, stretchered off, ambulance. I hope she's all right. Obviously, that was a long time ago. I hope that nothing bad happened. But that is one of the worst accidents it wasn't the drivers, because I've seen drivers crash, but that was the worst photographer media accident I think I've ever seen. I've seen people slapped by spoilers a lot, but that's different. That's quite funny in a way. That was bad. But yeah,
I'd struggle to even watch that. I just couldn't. It just been so much shock.
It was awful, especially through 400 mil. Like it was like perfect. And I saw her and I thought, I never took a photo of that because that's awful. I wouldn't do that. But I remember thinking, as the tyre sheared off, I thought this is not going to end well. And all I could think of was, are Ricky and me far enough back? Because obviously your immediate thought is, have we just been stupid here? But we were sort of 2 corners up at the time, getting that perspective kind of shot dead on. But yeah,
Just real quick, Dan, just thinking about the Stone story of what happened to you. Again, just from a psychological aspect, have you gone back into those positions again since that's happened, or have you steered clear?
Well, you'd think I would have learned from my lesson, right? That's really, but no. If anything, I am more aware of what can go wrong, and I still choose to put myself in situations that could go wrong. But there is a level of trust. But in fact, that's actually a good way of putting it. So I won't put myself in harm's way for anyone. It has to be someone that I've worked with multiple times, or I trust, or I've watched multiple times. So, for example, again, I don't mean to name drop, but if Petter says to me, I want to do donuts around you, I'm not going to say no to Petter Solberg. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, he knows what he's doing. If some guy who's been doing motorsport, competitively for a month says, I want to do donuts around you, I'm like, no, that's not happening, mate. Like, there's certain levels of trust that you build, 100% trust you build between you and the driver. That is actually on a massive scale. Like, I remember there's a very talented Monster Energy driver called Luke Woodham, who is a stunt driver really for them. He does incredible stuff. And I've known Luke from when he used to do donuts in car parks. So I've known him before he was sponsored, before any of this was his main job. And we shut down during the lunch hour at Rallycross in Sweden. We shut a section of the track, and he did donuts around me on the track, and the crowd, I think, were absolutely loving it, because there's me just standing in the middle of this World Rallycross track, and Luke is just spinning around me, hand out the window. I think he's got a trick where he takes the steering wheel off the car and hangs out the window, and he dials the steering with the pedals. So he's going around me, steering wheel out, and it's just like... So yeah, to answer your question, you'd think I would learn, but no, it's just that maybe there's more of a level of trust now. That's really what it comes down to.
Amazing, seriously. You know, when I look through your photos, you have this insane ability to freeze the motion of a car, let's say, but the motion blur that's still going on around it is amazing. You know, just to go a little bit techie for a change, how do you normally go about achieving that type of a shot?
To be honest, it's pretty straightforward, actually, Nick. And that's not to be arrogant at all, because I'm not special in that sense. I believe the framing is my style that I bring to it, but the actual technical side of it is pretty straightforward. You kind of just drag the shutter. There's no real steady, sure way to do it, but you kind of, based on the speed of the vehicles that you're working with. So, for example, when I do superbikes, it's a lot faster, but when I do drift cars, it's a nice consistent speed, but they're erratic. When I do speedway, it's pretty constant. So you kind of learn the speeds of all the different vehicles, and that decides your shutter speed. Obviously, based on the light and everything else to go with it. But I mean, I always say to people when they're starting out, I always say, like, for example, if you can get a shot around 1/50th of a second, let's say F5, F6, you'll get the whole vehicle in focus, apart from the sort of the rear end, which is kind of what you want a lot of the time. And you'll get a really nice motion blur from all the wheels and the surrounding area. Again, there's no real hard, fast rule, but I always say, like, as long as you're under 1/100th and it's a good speed, you'll get a good element of speed. Like a good element of movement in the image. So I don't know, I've helped a lot of people trackside, and I've talked to a lot of people in media rooms, and I like to be able to show people stuff. So it's always hard on a podcast to describe like how I would do it. But yeah, if anyone sees me trackside, I'm more than happy to talk.
Oh, we should do a tutorial video on how to pan.
Oh yeah, that's hard. Yeah, you can. Yeah, that's something you could teach actually. To be fair, there's like little tricks like straight off the top of my head. If you're working with a long lens, I always cup the front just below the actual lens element or the lens hood, and that gives me a lot more stability. Another one would be always pan past the subject, never stop at the time that you've taken the photo. So always just go click, 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 and then keep going, because that rigid stop always ruins the last photo. I don't know, it's a psychological thing, I guess. Always ruins the last one. Yeah, they're just two kind of straight off tips, top of my head, for that kind of for panning work.
It's one of those situations where, you know, for those listeners who may just be getting into photography, you know, there's a general rule in photography that basically claims that your shutter speed should always be higher than your focal length in order to freeze action. Well, this is one of the situations where that really does not apply at all.
No. My slowest pan, I would think, is 1 second that I actually...
Wow.
Yeah, well, that was in a beautiful circuit in Valencia in Spain, and it was this glorious day, and it was just I just thought, the car's coming straight towards me. It had a long section of corners. It was a drift car, so lots of smoke, section of corners, and then a long right-hander, I think it was. And I was able to capture it and frame it so that I got the car with where it had been. So you had this big trail of smoke, but that was at 1 second. So it looked like the clouds from the car blended into the clouds of the sky, and it was just like, yeah, that is like a 1 in 1,000 shot, but it was cool. That's my longest one, I think. Wow. Normally 1/30th I am for everything. 1/30th.
Yeah. It takes a little while to practice that and to get shots that you know, where you've got the car or the moving element sharp, and then everything else, you know, just has that speed blur to it. It certainly took me a good few months to really get the hang of it. I don't really think I don't think I really have the hang of it, but you know, it's definitely something worth practicing.
It definitely is. I agree with that. It's because I'm not even like a steady hand. Like I'm quite shaky. So it's nothing to do. Like I'm not some incredible it's something you can teach yourself no matter what. I believe anyway. You just got to practice.
Yeah, and it's something that's relatively easy to practice. You know, you can practice it just out in the street. You know, just take regular cars as a practice subject. You know,
people might look at you funny, but you can do it. I've definitely done that as well, Kersten. When I started out, I went out onto my road, and it was like a dual carriageway near me, and I would sit there and just go, right, okay, that's 1/100th, right, 1/80th, 1/60th.
Well, exactly, right. Yeah, cyclists. I think last time I went to Amsterdam, I practiced that. There's plenty of cyclists around, so you just stay on the same corner and just go. You know.
That's absolutely amazing, because there's some situations where you have a lot of, like, trackside, there can be a lot of downtime. So there's quite a lot of us we spend a lot of time doing the slowest pan possible of either the recovery vehicles or the ones that are relaying the track at a speedway, like the tractor, and you try and make it look like it's going like 1,000,000 miles an hour, and it's just like you will find motorsport Facebook groups and so on are full of people that have gone made the tractor at 1 second or something, and it's like this tractor like.
That might be a fun challenge, actually, Nick. You know, we should make really slow objects look really fast, like a snail.
It's really entertaining. Definitely recommend it.
What shutter speed would you need to make a snail look like a high-speed car?
Oh, bloody hell. I think you definitely got to be down in seconds.
Hours.
So just leave the bulb. Just bulb open.
So, Dan, obviously, you know, we've talked a lot about you know, Monster and some of the work you did there. Obviously, a big client of yours for the longest time, and still are, I'm sure. But obviously, you've worked with many other clients who do, you know, different sports, different types of events. How do you find moving between one type of event to another, and the different, you know, do you have different approaches to different types of events, different sports?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Yeah, because I mean, if I try and start from the beginning, I mean, motorsport is what I made my name doing, if I can even say that. But that's where I established myself. But it started off actually with four-wheel tarmac, which is basically all your touring cars and your drifting and stuff like that. That then I then had to adapt to learn off-road four-wheel, so rallies, rallycross, things like that. And then from there, I must have piqued the interest of people in the two-wheel departments. So then you start learning about shooting bikes, which was a whole other ball game. So then that's speedway, that's motocross, that's indoor and outdoor motocross, which is a whole different thing as well. And then you've also got your super bikes, your British super bikes. Yeah, it kind of, even the motorsport alone blew up. And I think, and that's just Monster Energy, really. So I think each one had to be treated, in fact, I won't say had to, each one I treated like I'd never shot it before. So each one I went in saying, I'm going to bring my style, but I'm not going to be overly confident here that I'm going to achieve anything. I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to bring what I think they hired me for, if that makes sense. And I'm going to do my best. And that's what's kind of rewarded me with that. Like I'm not actually a hugely confident person, especially with my work. So I've just gone in with the hope that what I'm going to do is going to be all right. Now, that's just the motorsport side of things. Like if you look at the other things I've done, when I approach a new client, such as, for example, Jet. So let's talk about like Jet Fuel, who I worked for, and I was working with them because I'd previously worked with Nick Hamilton, and he wanted me to be the photographer, and they took me on board for a project they were doing. And then I did some other stuff for them after that, basically, which was really good. Now that is a very different company to working for Monster Energy. That is not rad, awesome, cool, let's rock out and yeah, like that is not like that at all. Jet was very much like, they came to me and said, listen, we've seen what you've done, and we just want to, like, our brief is that we are a family-owned, family-run company. So this is the image that we normally get portrayed and stuff. So again, completely have to adapt. Again, that word again. It's based on the clients. I have studied every new client in the sense that I've read the history, read about them. I tried to understand what their current marketing material is, get an understanding for what they want, and then come to them with like a blank canvas of what I can achieve, rather than saying, oh, I did that for them, so I'll do that for you. That doesn't work. Like that's not, it's more of a case of, I know how to do that. Is that the kind of thing you want, or how can I make that work? Not, well, I delivered that, so you're going to get that too. That really doesn't work. In fact, I found there's no one I've worked for where that's worked. So it's the case, everything has had to be different and modular, if that makes sense.
Absolutely awesome. It's so important to understand individuals. And, you know, yeah, there's going to be some sort of commonalities between clients and, you know, the way that you do things because they like what you do. But to tailor it to each individual is critical, absolutely critical.
I mean, a lot of them have already had marketing material. So that's the thing. So you have them approach you because they like your style, but they want it themed similarly to what they've already had, which is understandable. I mean, you can always throw some new stuff in to show them what they could be getting, but at the same time, you have to kind of keep to the brief. You know, that's what they're there for. It's.
I liken it to, as you may remember, I've done a lot of audio work over the years, engineering and so forth. And when you're mixing a song for someone, they've often got what we'd call a rough mix beforehand. Now, they may have done it themselves. They may have had someone who'd recorded at the time do it there. It's so important to listen to that because they've heard that now a lot. And if you go in a completely different direction with it, then automatically not going to be as receptive to it or like it as much because they're so used to hearing something a certain way. You need to take what they've done and improve upon it, and hopefully improve upon it. And you know, and enhance it from there. But take the elements of what they've done there. What were the key bits? Why is that kick drum so loud? Why is that bass guitar so loud? Is it a bad mixing decision, or is it just that's what they really want from this? So you've just got to take it on board, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you ultimately you're serving the client rather than yourself. That's ultimately what it boils down to. Is that for creatives, especially in the beginning, that's always, it's a really important distinction to make. You know, just because you like a particular style of photography, or you know, you think like, well, this is my style of photography, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's what the client really wants. So it's really important to listen to the client. I think it takes a long time usually, to carve out a niche for yourself where people come to you because they specifically want your style, and there's so few, famous photographers that can demand that. I think generally speaking, as a working photographer, you really, you're looking at the client, you're listening to what they want, you get the brief, and then you execute, and you hope that hits the spot.
That's very true. You have to remember that you're working for someone. That's 100%. Yeah. I see a lot of people that are trying to make a way in it, and they say to me, "Oh, what went?" They'll take their situation and they go, "Oh, it seems to have gone wrong. They're not hiring me again." And I said, "Well, how did you approach it? Like, did you literally just throw them what you wanted to give them?" That's not how it works, unfortunately. You have to be so adaptable, and there are times where it is so annoying because, and I mean that truthfully, because your creativity can be stifled in the sense that you have to achieve the result they want. So it doesn't matter what you want to do, what you think you can do. You can propose ideas, and I'm fortunate enough to have been now with marketing departments that know me, and if I suggest something, more often than not, they're like, "All right, well, give it a go. It'll take you 10 minutes, Dan. Like, let's see how it looks." There are only very few of my clients that have actually really restricted my creativity. So again, fortunate, but at the same time, you're working for them. So that's it.
Man. So I think that's actually probably an opportune moment just to mention again that you have your own podcast, right?
Oh, yeah. So it's terrible, Nick, because I actually haven't put any new episodes up in a long time. I do have my own podcast, and it was a side project that we started. Again, I don't know why. I seem to have these grand ideas that I've got all the time in the world, and this was one of those. And I thought, well, I'm traveling anyway, so why don't I just start recording interviews with some of the guys I work with and some of the talented people that I've been fortunate enough to work with, and some of the drivers and stuff. And it was great. I think I did 22 episodes, I think. And I really enjoyed it. And again, it's actually, if anything, Nick, it's actually become a bit of a showcase because people see it and have said, "Oh, I like what you did there, Dan. Can you help us set up a podcast?" And so it's actually turned out into a couple of people that have made podcasts off the back of what I learned. So I'm happy. It's good. But yeah, I was basically, what's the best way to put it? It's almost like when I started out doing this, before I was doing photography for money, and if that makes sense, before I was doing that, I was in a collective of photographers who very, very talented individuals, a lot of whom never wanted to make a job out of it. And we wrote for an online website called Fueltopia, and we basically did articles and went to events and off our own backs. So this is like when I'm 18, all the way through uni. So I was doing this like just off my own back and trying to gain presence in that sense, and writing an article and then sharing it about. Mm-hmm. So anyway, there would be the 4 regulars on my podcast, and we were all people that started at the same time. And you've actually talked about one of them, who's a very good friend of mine. You've talked about him on your podcast, and that's Dave Cox, who now lives in LA. And he is an incredible CGI artist. Not to mention an amazing photographer, but that man has never wanted to take photography full time. And I'm always like, back in the day, I was pushing him. I was like, "You're incredible, you're amazing." Yeah. But he's never done that, and I applaud him for it as well, because it's meant that his creativity has never been stifled. It's never been controlled, never been told to tone it in. He has literally just gone however he wants. So yeah, huge credit to him. Very good pal of mine. And if you ever did want to hear our chats about various photography stuff, they're on our podcast. So
absolutely, and we'll put a link to your podcast and your website and whatnot in the show notes and the description below for sure.
There's some vlogs on there as well. That was again another project to see if I could do a vlog, and again that turned into helping people with creating vlogs and editing vlogs, which actually developed into 2 years of work for one client, which was amazing. So yeah, so it's these little projects that I did when I was already out earning a living anyway. I thought, well, if I bolt these on, then maybe it will show people, and it did. So again, talking back to, not having all your eggs in one basket, that's really what it is.
So if you've been following this podcast over the last few weeks and months, then you should probably know by now that every week Nick and myself set ourselves a little challenge. Last week it was a video challenge. This week we set ourselves a photo challenge. And that means we set a subject. In this case, it was flatlay. And then we have to go and produce a photograph each. And in the following episode, which is this one, we have a look at those photos and we talk about them, and we're looking forward to some constructive criticism by today's guest. So Dan, have you seen our efforts this week?
I have, and they are awesome. I love them. I love flatlay images. These are wicked.
Excellent. Yeah, it was really good fun producing those. So Nick, do you want to tell us a little bit about your photo? By the way, I should add that if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, then those photos are available for you to have a look at on our Facebook page. And that's facebook.com/ and I've forgotten what the Facebook link was. It's facebook.com/ Camera Shake Podcast. I'm sure that's what it is. Just look it up, have a look, leave us a comment, drop us a like. Very much appreciated. Anyway, so Nick, over to you. How did you come up with your photo this time?
Yeah, well, first thing to say is this is actually the first flatlay I've ever done. And I wanted to, there's a couple of things that went through my head to decide on the concept. And the first one was I wanted it to be, I wanted to be in it somehow. Because I don't think you don't typically see flatlays with people in it. So I thought, well, how am I going to go about doing that? And then I wanted the objects that I put in there to say something about me. And then there was a third aspect where I thought, well, how am I going to put these objects together? And I could only come up with one way if it was to talk about me. And that was to describe my personality a little. And that was, as you can see in my photo, extremely uniform, as many lines as possible, and on a wooden floor, which has lines to go with it. And so that's what I decided to go with.
So I just got to say, you're also dead center almost with between two boards.
Yeah. That was absolutely on purpose as well. So the objects I ended up choosing, there was probably twice as many objects as this, but these were the ones that felt like they went together a bit better than some of the other ones I had. Some were larger. So we go from sort of left to right. You got kind of the video element of it, moving across to gaming, and then you got music over the right hand side while mixing my playing bass and whatnot. Coffee's always got to be there, man. So we've got coffee in there, and then we've got the two little ducks. One's a Batman duck. I love Batman and all of those kind of things. And then the other one's actually a Darth Vader duck. Massive Star Wars fan. In fact, behind me, if he's still there, we've got a little Star Wars figure behind me. And so, and then the secondary kind of, well, the next kind of aspect of it is I wanted it to feel, in this instance, as natural as possible. But obviously, a lot of editing still went into this. But I wanted to keep the feel generally quite natural, as if you had just looked over me. That's kind of what I went with there. Not sure what else to describe in that. From a gear perspective, because I generally do videography, and I wanted my video camera to be in the photo, I used what I use for photography at the moment, which is just a Nikon just D7200. It's shot at, I think it's at 18 or 20 mil in the end on a Sigma art lens. And then the setup is, I was really confined. The space I was in was incredibly confined. So it was a real struggle to get it. So to the left of that photo is my front door. And that front door has some natural light coming through it. I've got, on top of the camera, I had to put my flash. So it's actually on top of the camera in this instance, with it angled. So imagine it being flat, and then the head is angled out. So it's pointing out towards the door, but just at possibly a 45-degree angle.
Yeah, you can see it in your eyes. It gives it away.
Exactly. And then also in front of the door, but just slightly off to the side, there's a reflector there. Because I tried it the other side, it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. So I put the reflector there. And then on my right-hand side, there's a white door, which I've shut, which is given just enough reflection back to fill in most of the right-hand side. It's not filled in quite as much as I'd potentially like, but I was happy enough to go with what I had there, and I didn't have anything else at the time to kind of help me out. So there we go. That's my photo.
So did you shoot that with constant light or continuous light?
No, just the flash.
Oh, okay.
Just the flash.
Multiple exposures, Nick.
Sorry.
Is it multiple exposure, multiple focus points, so that you get each? No, one
shot.
One shot. Cool.
Yeah, one shot. I toyed with the idea of the. Sorry.
I wondered if you'd done any stack focusing to make sure, because the items are also perfectly focused. I wasn't sure if you maybe had done.
No, I put the what aperture was at the end? I was at I think 5.6, somewhere around there. I forget exactly now.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah. That's
I toyed with putting the aperture wide open, but it just looked better in that way. So
I actually really like the cold to warm as well element that you've got. It's very interesting that the camera equipment is what I would call in the cold, and then you go to the warmth of the guitar head. Which I really like that. And I almost, that's really cool that divides the two passions / jobs. And I really like that, because really what you've done is you've divided almost two careers, and then in the middle you've got your fun stuff. And I believe, is that Chinese takeaway chopsticks?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Amazing. Right. So there you go. So you've literally, like, it's the fun stuff that makes you in the middle, and then these are your creative outlets on the out. I really like that. That's really cool.
Absolutely. And I'm glad I wasn't going to mention it, but I'm glad you noticed the cold to warm. That was actually a happy accident. It wasn't planned, but it's just the way it worked out based on the way the lighting had to be set up, and just that low reflection coming off that white door. It's just ended up that way.
Really nice.
Yeah. I like the highlights on the black objects. It's difficult to photograph black objects, just generally, because you lose a lot of detail in the shadows, and it's black anyways. But I love the way that you've got these highlights on the camera body and on the PlayStation remote and on the ducks, and it really adds some really nice shape to them. You can really see the roundness of it, and that's just that. And you have a clear definition, and the outline, especially looking at the PS4 controller. Yeah, it's really nice the way that contrasts with the background as well. It's just, as
you say, you're bang on, Kersten. Like, these aren't easy objects, especially black items. From a product photography standpoint, these are difficult. This is wicked. Right.
Yeah, it's like the Darth Vader duck's head. That helmet is just really nice the way that falls off. And although on the right hand side it does go into the shadow drops off a little bit, but actually you get that really nice roundness of the helmet and everything. It's really well done, actually. I really like that. It's cool.
And then I guess the last thing there's two quick things I'll just mention, just from an editing perspective. There was a little bit of photoshopping that happened, just to get rid of dust, things like that. That's all. Just once that clarity was heightened, the dust just, oh god, especially on black. And it was unbearable. So I just got rid of some of that dust. And then some just basic, it wasn't really a huge amount done in Lightroom on it. Just real general stuff. Adjusted the colors ever so slightly here and there, but not much. And then from a sort of critical perspective now is, I didn't notice it as much at the time, but I notice it now. I've seen the photo a few times. Is there a couple of objects that are just off straight, and it does aggravate me a little bit, like the NS10 in the corner.
I was trying to work out if it was barrel distortion on the top right and top left, but I think it is the Yamaha Studio isn't quite straight, is it?
So it's not. No, it's not quite straight, and that was hard enough to get that looking the way it was. It's actually, I had to raise it at the back and at the side,
right?
Because when it was flat on the ground, you can see if the lens is on the left-hand side, right? You get more of the side of the object, and that speaker looked rubbish when it was sat flat. So as I raised it to make it look more flat on with the lens, I clearly just didn't position it quite right, and that aggravates me. There you go. You live and learn.
The reason why that stands out then, Nick, is because everything else is so perfectly straight. Like, it's so minute with the the PS4 controller is ever so slightly minute, and the only reason you'd know that if you knew how many holes there were for the speaker. That's the only reason why you can even pick that out. The GH5 looks okay, but again, this is why I thought it was barrel distortion on the right hand side. That's because I thought, well, that's weird that it's only the top corner.
I know, man. I know. But yeah, so from a critical point of view, they're things that I would definitely change. And if
I tell you what I love about this photo though is that it so clearly demonstrates the difference in personality between you and me. It's just, I kind of, when I was thinking about this challenge, beforehand, I kind of thought, I bet Nick's going to do something that's like perfectly geometrical and everything's like perfectly in line. And then there's me just going, total chaos.
Kersten, that's probably a good point to transition to your photo, which couldn't be more contrasting in styles. So can you tell us a little bit about how your concept and how you came about this one? It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the main concept, I was looking for a concept to start with, and I wanted to go down the sort of explorer type of route, and at the same time, I was trying to put in a lot of things, a lot of objects that would, describe my personality in a way. And I just started dabbling with calligraphy, and so I've been writing a lot with ink, so that sort of became part of the photo. So these are all really objects that are either old or they mean something to me, or they part of my sort of family tradition or whatever. So all of the things you see in there somehow in one way or another relate back to me. That's essentially it. So there's the Chinese stamp. So that's a jade stamp, and the Chinese ink pot, if you want, and the stamp. So that's a kind of travel thing. The Chinese symbols they actually mean something. I have no idea what they mean, by the way, but they do actually mean something. So any of our Chinese viewers can tell me what they are. So there's the hunting knife. My granddad was a forest ranger, so that was one of the things I got as a kid. And there's on the left hand side there is my journal. This is a leather bound journal, and that's my granddad's pocket watch. And so everything that's in there, in one way, shape, or form, is really a treasured little knickknack. I do create flatlays now and again, and I have a big box of knickknacks, props essentially, that I'll throw in whenever I make something. By the way, the thing about the background, if you have a closer look, you'll see it's shot on a wooden board, which Nick knows very well, I think. I use that board for so many different things. For flat lays, I shoot a photo series called 3 Heads in a Row on this, so it kind of acts as a table almost. And I shoot people sitting at this board. And on the right-hand side, you'll see some kind of packing paper. And that packing paper is actually the back of an Amazon parcel that I got. And it's because, we're in lockdown. So, Amazon's become my best friend. Every shopping experience I've had over the last 2.5-3 months or something has been via Amazon. So you kind of made its way.
Me and Dan set that standard when we were there, I think.
We did. I believe so.
Yeah, so that's basically how that came together. And it was just the subject matter, if you want, was kind of explorer type
I love the Olympus pen sneaking at the bottom as well. That is that is a classic camera.
Yeah, exactly. So that's I have a little collection of classic cameras. So that's the one that
I got to say, to me, this is straight out of the Uncharted video games. It is straight out of Indiana Jones. I can imagine it's fantastic. I could imagine on a set they would take this photo, so they made sure it was exactly the same for the next time they shot there. Like it's literally, it's just so cool. There's so much to look at. it's funny because when I look between the two, I see a lot of similarities myself in Nick's, but I see yours as where I'd want to be. This chaotic, warm, happy to just lay it out and enjoy it, and I love it. I think it's brilliant.
So it's the interesting thing about these things is there's a lot of set dressing that goes into putting a photo together like this, because it looks chaotic, but actually every little thing, it's been moved around, shifted around. There's so many levels of set design that go into that.
I mean, obviously no disrespect to it, because to me, I can see that you have focused every element. I mean, even it's little things like, to me, my favorite, in fact, there's two things that I absolutely adore. One is the ink pot that's open. I think that is a fantastic centerpiece, and it ties off against your stamp beautifully under the magnifying glass. But that pocket watch, that is stunning, and the fact that you brought the chain back into the shot, that's so nice.
Yeah. So the thing about the shot is actually the whole shot is larger than this, and this is a crop. So you spend a lot of time with these sort of things, cropping it, because I wanted to create something that would work as a, like a Facebook banner, as well as, an Instagram crop. Yeah. So exactly. Yeah. And it's, in fact, I have it as a wallpaper on my phone. So it also works, in portrait, on the phone. So I've got a different crop for that, and the stamp in the magnifying glass, that's a composite, so that's a different shot. So because I wanted to be magnifying, and the other thing is the name, like the stamp itself is the actual stamp, but I'm sort of considering using that as a logo on my website. So I want to kind of bring that in, and I might actually stamp all of my photos with that stamp. Nice. So that's just that was a consideration. There's also the US $50 in the top. I was going to put some Canadian money in there, but because part of my family are Canadian. But I don't know if you've seen Canadian money, like the bills. Look like they're straight out of Monopoly.
It's like our new money, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So didn't really work, but it was fun putting it together. It was probably, I don't know, it took me a couple of hours to, dress the set, as it were.
I was going to ask that, how long it took. I mean, how long did yours take, Nick?
Probably all in all, a couple of hours to shoot, based on the kind of confined area I was in, and deciding what to use and getting the lighting right and whatnot.
They're so cool. It's lovely to hear the history of everything in yours as well. I love the fact you've included so many family heirlooms in there, Kersten, as well. That's really nice.
Yeah. Virtually everything in there is to some degree a family heirloom, or something like that. I mean, you can, just under the Bowie knife on the very right hand side, you can see a little sliver of chrome coming through that. And that's you can see it better in the full shot, but basically that was my granddad's cigarette case back from the 1930s.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's so like I said, I have a box of knickknacks that I use for these sort of things, and there's a lot of stuff's in there, and it pops up in. It always depends on thematically what the theme is of a flat lay like that.
I'll be honest, I've never done one of these, and seeing these inspires me to give it a go, because the most I've done is a shot of my gear, like one of those bag shots which shows everything, which is nothing like this. I think I'd enjoy doing one of these. This is really cool, like
fun. Right?
I find it's therapeutic. I think that's what I would call it. It's really good fun to make it, and of course you want to light it and get the lighting right, because it's the thing with flat lays is, you really want to make them look like it's just window light. It's just stuff randomly thrown, onto the floor, and there's just happened to be a window in the right place, and and just took a shot.
Is yours a softbox or a window slightly to the left of your shot?
It's fully artificial. It's an octobox, and I use a variety of white foam core plates that I place around to get the reflection right and stuff. So it's lovely.
It's a very even light. Like it's the mag light that gives it away, if anything, and the top of the Olympus pen. That's it. Otherwise, that's really, really cool.
Yeah. So the trick with those is, and this is like really just through experience, the trick is to slightly underexpose those, especially when you have shiny objects in there. You know, the zipper light is a problem. You know, the coin could be a problem, and the nips are a problem. The watch, you know, the watch face is a problem. The Mac light's a problem. So you've got these very shiny objects in there. So if you slightly underexpose, make sure you're not blowing out the highlights on those, and then you can bring a lot of it back. You know, so especially, you know, a modern full frame camera, you shoot in RAW, you've got that flexibility to bring a lot of the shadows back. So, you know, watching the highlights with that is critical.
Okay, you mentioned there's obviously the composite with the magnifying glass logo there. Is the rest one shot, or is that is it multiple?
Yeah, everything else one shot. I mean, the thing about these is, that's what I find. You know, I spend a lot of time laying those out to start with, and then the actual shoot itself is really quick. I mean, once I've got it laid out, there's a couple of test shots, and I shoot them tethered, so I can see on the laptop. I can see what's coming through straight away, and then I can move things around. And I'm forever fiddling. You know, it's like I don't know, there's like a paper clip that's not in the right place. You know, I mean, some of it is, like I said, some of it is sort of highly organized. The other thing, one thing I like to do is to give it another layer and another dimension by just throwing some dust on it, or in this case, some wood shavings. That really is completely random. I mean, it just goes bang, and there it is. Yeah. You know, so, yeah, I mean, so, and the more time you spend in the beginning, the less time you have to spend compositing stuff afterwards. You know, I like to spend time in getting the look right and putting some kind of textured overlays on it. There's a couple of textures on that give it a slight filmic look. But in terms of compositing things, I knew that I was going to composite the magnifying glass, like whatever the glass itself shows. So I did a number of different shots, you know, to get the magnification right in that. But other than that. So we've come to the end of this week's podcast. Massive thanks to this week's guest, Dan Fegent. Thank you very much for being on the show. We thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you had a good time. It
was honestly fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. It was a real education, I have to say. You know, I'm looking forward to a time when, you know, we can go out again and racing's happening again, and I can try some of your suggestions, particularly with the panning. I'm definitely going to be trying that out for sure.
Definitely. Okay.
So yeah. Now that is it for this week, folks. You've been listening to the Camera Shake podcast with me, Kersten Lutz and Nick Kirby. As always, you find all the links on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/Camera Shake podcast. I will also have a link to Dan Fegent's website there, which is www.danfegentphotography.com. Check it out. There's some real treats on there. If you're into motor racing, into photography in general, then definitely make sure you check that. But again, the link's on our Facebook page. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, then please do us a favor and subscribe to the Camera Shake podcast over on YouTube. And as always, head over to Facebook and drop us a like there too. So without further ado, we will see you again next Thursday.